I'm Susan Bollendorf, president of the Chevy Chase Historical Society. I want to welcome you to our fall lecture. The lecture is called Separate but Unequal, The History of School Segregation in Montgomery County. And our presenter, Ralph Buglass, is a Montgomery County native. He is a history buff and has taught lifelong learning institutes at lifelong learning institutes associated with Johns Hopkins and American universities. I think some students might be in the audience, apparently. I met a few people. He's also taught at Montgomery College, and in 2020, along with Peerless Rockville, he co-authored Images of America, Rockville, which is a pictorial history of Rockville for their 250th anniversary. And he was recently a keynote speaker at Montgomery History's conference, which was just a week ago, I think, a little over a week ago.
Last Saturday.
Yeah. He's a retired communications professional, a graduate of Winston Churchill High School, and has a BA in history from American University. From Cornell, and an MA in journalism from American University. So before I hand the podium over to our speaker, please note that on your seats, on your chairs, you have a survey. CCHS really cares about your opinions about our programs and what your interests are. So we'd love to hear from you, and we have a little prize. We have a drawing at the end of the lecture, and we have a little prize for, that's just a drawing. So one lucky person will get some CCHS merch. And now, please help me give a warm welcome to our speaker, Ralph Buglass.
Thank you all for coming out today. Very nice day, other than being a little windy. Important local topic, one that perhaps we don't care to remember, but it certainly is important to remember because of the legacy of as I say, separate but certainly unequal education that was the case throughout the South with segregated schooling, but I always am quick to point out to people, especially since so many people have moved here from elsewhere, that Maryland is a southern state, and our schools were segregated for almost 100 years. So, as I say, we're going back to the rather lamentable days of segregation in our schools, supposedly separate but equal, but of course nothing equal about it. Now, today Montgomery County is a very progressive locality, but it's important to remember that, as I said, historically, we're part of a southern state south of the Mason-Dixon line, which had slavery and then segregated its schools. And here in Montgomery County, racial discrimination took various forms, including, as you see here, restrictive housing covenants, and black people were denied access to some public places, leading to a number of notable civil rights protests. And I would note, just sort of an interruption here, a public service announcement. There is the civil rights protest at Glen Echo Amusement Park in 1960. There's a marvelous, relatively new documentary about that. And there's going to be a free screening of it a week from tomorrow, November 24th, at the Black Rock Center for the Arts. So I just wanted to pass that along. But back to our regularly scheduled program. Although I mentioned other forms of discrimination and racial exclusion, I think school segregation was perhaps the most egregious. First, because education is so important to getting ahead, and when the opportunities are less than, there is a long-lasting legacy. But also, very importantly, segregation in our schools was absolutely embedded in law, lasted from almost a century, around the end of the Civil War, until 1961, when the county had officially desegregated the schools here in Montgomery County. Now, a major milestone in this story is, of course, the landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, the ruling that school segregation was unconstitutional, won by the legendary Thurgood Marshall, later the first African-American Supreme Court justice. But it was a much younger Thurgood Marshall who figures importantly in the local story of segregation right here in Montgomery County. In fact, there he is with two colleagues leaning against the front steps of the Gray Courthouse in Rockville, no longer used as a courthouse, but recently renovated. And the courtroom where Thurgood Marshall appeared has been restored, looks exactly as it did when he appeared there. He was here in 1937 to argue a case involving the unequal salaries of black and white public school teachers here in Montgomery County. So significant this case was that one legal scholar says the long road to Brown versus Board of Education began right here in Montgomery County with this case. So a lot of history. I've boiled it down to a three-act play. First, right after the Civil War, African-American communities formed all over our county, and on their own, the black communities immediately began establishing schools. Education so long denied was highly valued. And then came county-run public schools, but well after there were public schools for white children. And it was a completely separate system well into the 20th century. And then the final act, segregation's slow demise, beginning with Thurgood Marshall's early challenge here in Montgomery County, culminating in the Brown decision and the county desegregating its schools over a 6-year period. Began in 1955 and, as I said, finished 1961 when the county had declared its schools desegregated. But not before our last-ditch attempt to show separate schools might be equal. I'll explain as we go along. So I want to start with some population figures as context. When the county was formed in 1776, and indeed next year we will be marking our semi-quincentennial along with the nation itself. In 1776, when the county was formed, about a third of our population was African American, and of course nearly all enslaved here in Montgomery County. The peak of slavery was the early 19th century here in Montgomery County. Nearly half of Montgomery County's population at that time was African American. Again, the vast majority enslaved. But think about that. It shows that slavery was more prevalent here than is generally recognized today. Very important to remember. Slavery is still significant here in Montgomery County by the start of the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, as I mentioned, the newly freed formed communities all over the county. But then back to the population after the war, and in the first half of the 20th century, a steady decline in the black population in percentage terms. So this is the period of school segregation that we'll be talking about, and then desegregation, when the actually relatively few black children were put in classes that were overwhelmingly white and not always welcoming. So just to bring us up on population, since the 1970s, the black population, along with other racial and ethnic groups, has been increasing so that today we, of course, are a very diverse county, majority-minority. No one racial or ethnic group makes up a majority. Here are the most recent census figures, and in our schools even more so today. So the story of education for blacks in Montgomery County starts in Sandy Spring in the eastern part of the county, a community of Quakers who emancipated their enslaved people beginning in the late 1700s. So Sandy Spring had a significant pre-Civil War free black community, represented by this church, an earlier building of which had the first school for African Americans by 1864. And that's a crucial year in another way. A new state constitution adopted that year abolished slavery in Maryland, making Maryland the first southern state to do so. And that same constitution also finally established the county-by-county public school system that we have today. But no thought really was given to schools for the children of the newly emancipated until about 8 years later, 1872, a law was enacted requiring that the counties extend public education to black children. But it was in a totally separate system, right down to separate budgets, and never enough money for the black schools. In the interim, and this is Act 1, as I said, the black communities on their own opened schools for their children. Churches also coming along very quickly, the churches often doubling as schools, as in Sandy Spring. And these communities were assisted by two important organizations. First, philanthropic organizations like this one. It was called the Baltimore Association for the Moral and Educational Improvement of the Colored People, in the language of the time. This organization would provide a teacher to the community so long as the community could provide some kind of space for a school. Also assisting the black communities was the Freedmen's Bureau. There's the full name of it. It's the federal agency that was created by Congress after the Civil War to help the enslaved, the newly emancipated, all throughout the South transition to a life of freedom and, it was hoped, full citizenship. The Freedmen's Bureau had an office right here in Montgomery County in Rockville. And in his first report, the superintendent of that office noted that, yes, there is a school in operation in Sandy Spring for the black community. It's supported by the Baltimore Association. It's in a flourishing condition, he said. Open for both day and evening classes. That meant both for children and adults. About 40 scholars, as students were called then. And he noted that efforts are being made for establishing a second school in Rockville and then maybe elsewhere in the county. And that Rockville school did come about within about a year thanks to this petition signed by 20 men pledging their support for a school. It's interesting to note that of these 20 men, 15 could only sign their name with an X, having been denied education. And one who could sign his name, Hanson Martin, well, you see, he had some difficulty, left out the first N, obviously still learning to write. So a school, as I said, did come about. It was held in the basement of this quite historic church in Rockville. The next year, an African-American woman, Mary Brashears, living in Rockville, sold for $1, to make it official, a half acre of land that she owned to a group that was acting as school trustees. Remember, these not yet public schools, schools formed by the communities for their children. So there was a body of usually men serving as school trustees. And the purpose for erecting or allowing to be erected a schoolhouse for the use, benefit, and education of the colored people of Montgomery County forever. And indeed, a school came about, the Freedmen's Bureau providing materials, as this order shows. However, it was slow going in elsewhere around the county. The superintendent reporting that I'm informed a building put up by the colored people last year, about 5 miles above Rockville, north of Rockville, we think, for a church and schoolhouse serving dual purpose, was set fire to and destroyed shortly after its completion. And in the face of such hostility, the superintendent noted that the colored people, as a general thing, manifest a desire to avoid trouble with the white people and frequently submit to imposition through fear of gaining their ill will by complaining. So this sets the picture of what Montgomery County was like after the Civil War. But jump ahead a few years, 1869, a Freedmen's Bureau report for all of Maryland shows that here in Montgomery County, in addition to the Sandy Springs School and the Rockville School, 8 others had come about with the help of the Freedmen's Bureau, started either by community trustees or churches. I'll mention just one here, this last one. It says Damascus. It's actually this building, a little west of Damascus, a church which doubled as a school. Today, it's the Pleasant Grove Community Church, the same building, just added onto, making this the only building associated with the very important Freedmen's Bureau that still stands in our county. Quite a distinction. All right, now Act 2, public schools actually run by the county. Segregated schools for the black children. And even though it was the duty of the counties to set up such schools, by no means did a full-fledged network come about right away. The county gradually incorporated these pre-existing community schools to be public schools that they would run, the county would run. This was the first one, actually, when in 1872, the community there, Norbeck Mount Pleasant, sold their school to the county. A year later, another community, Mount Zion, eastern part of the county, which had been holding school in a church that the Freedmen's Bureau had helped to build, asked the county for funding through that new law, 1872 law that I mentioned, and the community built this school, now the oldest former all-black school still standing in the county. It's worth noting that when this school closed in the 20th century and the county went to sell it back to the church there, the county discovered that it didn't actually have a deed for the land. So anxious was the community to have a public school that they essentially had donated the land. And so this is the, as I said, the oldest surviving former all-black school in the county. In this spot, you've probably driven by opposite the county police headquarters on Route 28, west of Rockville. The community also sold their school to the county, but that building burned, also under suspicious circumstances. There continued to be much resistance to black schools. And a nearby old white school building was moved there as a replacement. It's this portion of the building that still stands there on Route 28 today. The county then built a new school for the white students. It took a while for some communities to actually get a school building. Here in Martinsburg, a little west of Poolesville, a community school started meeting in the church there in 1869. And it didn't get this actual county school building until about 2 decades later. Now, behind the church and the school there is what's called a benevolent society building. Benevolent society like mutual aid organizations in black communities that provided insurance and things not available in a otherwise rigidly segregated society, the community banding together to provide this. And this site is very significant as the only one in Maryland with all 3 of these very important community institutions still standing all together. So important that this building was recently restored after nearly falling down. Preservation matters to tell this story. This was west of Poolesville. Right in Poolesville, another community school begun in 1869, later became a county school, meeting in that Benevolent Society building also, no longer still standing. This community had to wait for an actual school building much longer, 1927, nearly 6 decades. Even worse, perhaps, this school that I showed earlier, the only Freedmen's Bureau building still standing, it also became a public school called the Purdom School, but for its entire existence, till 1939, it met in this church, the county renting the church. So that while it has that distinction, as I said, of being the only building still standing that was associated with the Freedmen's Bureau, it also has a rather dubious honor, as you might say, the poster child of the low regard that the county had for the black school system. Representative of these early public schools is this one. It's a museum today. You can visit and see what schooling was like in a one-room school. Great to take kids to. And while academics were taught, hard to see, but at the top of the blackboard, the alphabet there in cursive writing. In addition to academics, so was vocational training, symbolized by the sewing machine that you see, and tools, because girls would, by and large, become domestics later in life, and manual labor jobs for the boys. Job opportunities so very limited in a segregated society. This school opened in 1896, and that's an important year also, the same year that the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a rather infamous decision embedded into law, the so-called separate but equal doctrine as justification for segregation. But of course, here as elsewhere, not equal at all. The black schools were overcrowded with far more students than in the white schools, inadequate supplies. You've heard about hand-me-down books. The teachers paid much less, and I'll talk about this much more coming up. And a shorter school year for the black schools to begin with. And then remember I said separate budgets. When the money ran out, the black schools would close early in the school year, as early as March in 1904, while the white schools stayed open. So we have this U.S. government report about Montgomery County, an educational survey of a suburban and rural county just over the line from the nation's capital. And it provides cold, hard numbers. Shows the two budgets, separate budgets for 1911, and if we figure in the enrollment, the county was spending 5 times as much on the white students as per black student. The report also noted that the black schools were neglected and dilapidated, but interestingly, slightly larger percentage of the black children were attending school than were the white children. This is before the days of compulsory education. Again, this shows how much education was valued in the black communities. And also remarkable, the black teachers pretty much equally qualified as the white teachers, and always white teachers in the white schools, black teachers in the black schools. Remarkable, I say, because opportunities for higher education for blacks also so limited at the time. A teacher who had 40 students in her one-room school sums it all up. She says, the school board doesn't send many resources our way. We do the best we can with help from the parents and the community, everyone pitching in, very supportive. And she says, I myself always bring extra lunch to make sure no one goes hungry. You hear it from people who attended these schools. The teachers, though, absolutely dedicated, doing what they could with the inadequate supplies to make sure that, to do everything they could so that the kids would get ahead. Absolutely dedicated teachers in the schools. So it's against the backdrop of these dismal conditions that Rosenwald schools in the early 20th century were something of a godsend. Named for Julius Rosenwald, then the president of Sears Roebuck. This is Sears catalog days. Sears was the Amazon of its time. Julius Rosenwald was very wealthy and philanthropic as well, ultimately provided about $4 million for building of public schools for black students throughout the South. Still segregated schools, but schools that were much better than largely the shacks in which black students were taught. About 5,000, as well as a few other kinds of auxiliary buildings. 5,000 Rosenwald schools throughout the South. To give you an idea of their significance, after they were all built in the early 20th century, 1 of every 3 black students in the South attended a Rosenwald school. Congressman John Lewis did, Maya Angelou, many others. And you see the northernmost reach of Rosenwald schools here in Maryland. Here in Montgomery County, we had 17 Rosenwald schools, depending on how you count, 15 to 17. And in contrast to the rest of the South, 2 of every 3 black children here in Montgomery County ultimately attended a Rosenwald school. Again, these were still public schools run by the county, but built with money, some money from Julius Rosenwald. It's important to point out, however, that the black communities where these schools were built had to contribute also some funding for their construction. And so that was like double taxation. The white communities didn't have to chip in for the construction fund for the white schools being built. The best restored surviving Rosenwald school here in Montgomery County is this one. It's the old Smithville School. It's located on Randolph Road, just east of the intersection with New Hampshire Avenue. You go around a bend there. It's behind a fence. You probably have never noticed it. It is sometimes open. Here it is as a school, so not an authentic restoration. Rosenwald schools had very large windows to let in as much sunlight as possible since no electricity. This building, as I said, occasionally opened to the public. When this woman, several years ago, attended, she was absolutely delighted to see her picture as a little girl because she had attended this school. So this is not ancient history by any means. And a sign out front talks about Rosenwald schools and the importance of remembering this history. Also surviving, but in a much different form, is the Poolsville Rosenwald School, a county highway garage today. But if you go around back, it's the only building in Montgomery County that still has the original distinctive tall windows. And this is the school that I mentioned earlier that had to wait 60 years to get this, the actual school building for that community. A group has gotten together working for historical signage for this building. It's hard to come about, but it is happening. The sign will be unveiled the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and everyone is invited. There's the location, Jerusalem Road off Route 28, west of Damascus. If you know Poolsville, this is the Poolsville Recycling Center also, affectionately called the Poolsville Beauty Spot. I'll mention 2 non-surviving Rosenwald schools. First, this one, the Rockville so-called Colored Elementary School, built 1921. It was the first Rosenwald school built in Montgomery County. And then in 1927, right next to it, was built finally a high school for black students. The result of a long grassroots effort by the black community led by Noah Clark, for whom there really should be a high school named here in Montgomery County. I say finally because nearby in Rockville, the first high school for white students came about much earlier. Some high school classes had started back in 1892, so black students had to wait 35 years for high school education. And by then, there were 10 high schools for white students all around the county. The same year, the so-called colored high school opened. The first iteration of Bethesda Chevy Chase High School was built. Separate but supposedly equal, but not in terms of, this building actually, the first BCC high school later became Leland Junior High School, if you're a long timer, no longer stands. It's where the community center is today. Supposedly separate but equal, picture's worth 1,000 words, and certainly not in terms of grade levels. And no transportation initially provided for the black children to this high school. So the community, again, on their own, pooled funds and bought a second-hand bus that was driven each day by one of the students, the young man sitting on the hood of that bus. Even with the transportation difficulties, the school was soon overcrowded, and so a larger replacement was opened nearby in Rockville. Building still stands today. It was actually a wood frame building moved from Tacoma Park, and then a brick facade was put up around it to try to match the larger BCC building erected that same year. And this is one of the buildings standing on the BCC campus today. It's not actually, you might think this is the one facing out on the East-West Highway. It's the one actually that faces on to the side street, Chelton Road there. And then another one almost identical built at right angles to it. So this is the oldest part of BCC. This second black high school, and important to remember that only one high school for black students at any one time in Montgomery County. This replaced the earlier one, and there will be a replacement for this one later. But this building was soon overcrowded as well, and so a wooden addition was built out back by an industrial arts class, and Quonset huts after World War II became the gym and the cafeteria at this school. No Quonset huts at any of the white high schools. But finally, in 1951, and this brings us into Act 3, the last act, a modern high school, generally on par, at least in terms of the facility, to the white high schools. This is Carver High School, and when it first opened, junior college, because blacks could not attend Montgomery College across the street at that time. But to this day, alums remember this school affectionately.
For the first time in a long time, we as a black community, we had something brand new, and that was exciting.
We got new books, and it was the first time the boxes and things were opened by the students and put here and there and so forth.
What a great opportunity I had to be educated in such a wonderful school and such wonderful teachers.
They were so proud that they fought so hard to get a new high school, and that was important for them.
And one of the people interviewed there, Bessie Corbin, is still with us today at 102. So about the same time that Carver was built, 4 modern elementary schools built all around the county to consolidate the black students and close all those substandard schools. Here's an aerial view of one of those schools. So a large school, so at last, each grade in its own classroom, and finally kindergarten and other subjects offered that previously had been denied. One teacher says it was like Montgomery County finally got a conscience, but there's also another way to look at it. It could be also characterized as a last-ditch attempt to maintain segregation, try to show, as I said, that separate could be equal, at least in terms of the facilities, because the handwriting was on the wall. Court challenges were coming along that would ultimately culminate in the U.S. Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education. This was the early 1950s. Brown handed down 1954. And in fact, a 5th modern consolidated elementary was to be built here down county, but it got bogged down, and then the Brown decision was handed down, 1954, as I said. So students attending these 4 old wooden buildings down county here were the first to be desegregated, going to previously all-white elementary schools near where they lived, 1955. The Kengar building there, upper right, that is the only one of these 4 buildings that survives, though remodeled. It's a community center today, just up Connecticut Avenue a ways beyond the Beltway. So desegregation is a huge topic. I'll just quickly note that the initial proposal was for a gradual 13-year process. That was not approved. Only spotty opposition, really. The first African-American principal of a former white school was Margaret Jones at Bannockburn, carefully chosen, a liberal community. A distinction certainly for her, but it was also actually a demotion because she had been serving in a higher level administrative position overseeing the entire black school system. Another principal resigned. She was reassigned to be an assistant principal under a white principal with less experience. Edith Throckmorton resigned for a time, led the NAACP here in Montgomery County. There is a park in honor of Edith Throckmorton in Kengar today. So, as I said, desegregation accomplished by the 1960-61 school year. And that actually made Maryland the first county to have accomplished that. Though there were still a number of elementary schools that were all white due to housing patterns. And housing patterns still today mean that the racial makeup of our schools vary tremendously. So of the 5 modern elementary schools, despite the baby boom that was causing schools to be bursting at the seams, this was the only one of the former black schools that became an integrated mainstream school. It's right across the street from the Boyd's one-room school. And both of these have historical designation now. So these 2 schools really serve as a bookends, I think, for the century-long period of school segregation. I'll close with Thurgood Marshall's early legal challenge, the beginning of Act 2, segregation's slow demise, the 1937 lawsuit that I mentioned earlier, brought on behalf of a teacher, William B. Gibbs, Jr. He was a teacher in that Rockville school that I showed. He was paid about $600 a year, and that was about half what a white teacher with the same qualifications was paid. Well, this case was big news in the African-American community. This is the Afro-American newspaper banner headline, "Equal Pay War Opens." I'll boil down the case. School board sought dismissal of this case, claiming that separate but equal was the law of the land, so there's really no case. But a 3-judge panel, which was rather unusual, unanimously denied that motion, and so ordering that the case go ahead to a full trial. In the face of that, the school board settled out of court and agreed to equalize the salaries after 2 years. They said they didn't have enough money to do it. This came about in July 1937. They said they didn't have enough money to do it in the school year starting that September. They'd pay half the difference, 1937-38, and then pay the full difference, pay equal salaries, 1938-39 school year. And that made Montgomery County the first spot virtually throughout the South where black and white teachers earned the same. So again, a huge victory, another banner headline, but it's really that early preliminary ruling by the 3-judge panel ordering the case to go ahead that this professor, author of a biography of Thurgood Marshall's early life, says was itself a landmark ruling. He's noting that it was essentially the first time that any court in the nation had found that black professionals with the same experience and credentials as white professionals had the right to equal pay. And further, he points out that this was indeed the first legal victory in the nation against K through 12 public school. And that is important because that is what the landmark Brown versus Board of Education was all about. The NAACP was also bringing cases involving law schools, but Brown talked about K through 12 public schooling. And so that's why Professor Larry Gibson says of the Brown decision, it all started right here in Montgomery County with the case brought by Thurgood Marshall and Mr. Gibbs for equal pay. Alas, Mr. Gibbs was fired a year later. Montgomery County, a very different place today. We have a school named in his honor, and in Rockville Town Center, about equidistant between the courthouse and the site of the school where Mr. Gibbs taught, is this work of art to honor Mr. Gibbs. It's on Gibbs Street, also named for him, and nearby is this, well, fictionalized newspaper. I'm certainly not going to call it fake news, but commemorating this important case. No large headline at the time pointing out the significance of this case. The case, as we might say today, went under the radar of the mainstream media at the time. So that's the three-act drama, shameful part of our history, but underlying, I hope you get a sense, struggle and a story of community perseverance, racial pride, commitment, and accomplishment in the face of a system that evidenced time and again that black lives in terms of educational opportunities did not matter. Just quickly, my sources here. I mentioned the book by Professor Larry Gibson, The Definitive History of the Black Schools, written by two teachers in the system, one of whom I quoted, Nina Clark, and a book just about the three black high schools, but remember, only one at any one time in Montgomery County. Speaking here on behalf of Montgomery History, thank you very much. On our website, you can find this article, thorough account of the very important pay case. It was called Gibbs versus Broom, Edwin Broom, the longtime superintendent of our schools. And this compilation is also on our website that I did with unofficial historian of the Lincoln Park African-American neighborhood in Rockville. And concerning the Freedmen's Bureau, I had the honor of just writing this for Montgomery History to kick off their observance of the 250th commemoration of our county's history. We offer a Zoom talk, usually every Tuesday, History Conversations. You can go to the website and get on the email list to learn what the topic will be. And if you're a history buff, I hope so, but you really don't need to be. I hope you in early next year, every year, Montgomery History joins with the school MCPS school system to have History Day, history projects by students, middle school and high school. All you really need to do is to give the students constructive feedback on their projects. You really don't need to have a history knowledge. So that is it. Otherwise, thank you to Chevy Chase Historical Society for a number of these books that was mentioned are on sale, $20, lower than the list price if you're interested. I'd be happy to sign it. Thank you. Absolutely.
Thank you. You filled the room. You more than filled the room, Ralph, with your talk. And he would like to take some questions if anyone in the audience has something, and just as long as you can speak loudly, and then we can repeat the question too. So, yes.
Why was he fired, Mr. Gibbs? Why was he fired?
Can you repeat?
Yes, the question was, why was Mr. Gibbs fired a year after bringing the suit? Certainly looks like retaliation, and that was certainly the fear. And the black teachers, with the additional pay that they got, contributed toward a contingency fund for Mr. Gibbs in that event. He was fired, the school board, I showed the school where he was teaching, the two-room Rockville Elementary School, Rockville Colored Elementary School. And the high school had been built right next to it. So by the time he was teaching there, the high school had moved to Lincoln High School. And so it was a four-room elementary school, quite a large school for a black school at the time. So he was also designated to be serving as acting principal while also still teaching. And the school board said, well, lo and behold, you don't have all the qualifications to be a principal. And it was on that basis that he was fired. He was a native of south of Philadelphia and returned there, got an additional degree, and the rest of his career was teaching in New Jersey. Yes?
I attended Chevy Chase Elementary, the Rosemary School, from 1958 to 63. I don't remember ever seeing a black student at the school, but I think you said the down county elementary schools desegregated. Was that simply because of housing patterns, or?
Yes, it would have been.
Because there were like 0 black students up until 63.
It was the black students were assigned to the schools nearest where they lived, and the nearest black community that I know of here to that the Chevy Chase Elementary School would be Littonsville toward Silver Spring, and so schools closer than Chevy Chase Elementary. So indeed, it was not. It was that the students were assigned to schools closest to where they lived, rather than taking an overlook at Montgomery County and trying to achieve, sort of a racial mixture everywhere. Because remember, the black population only 4% at that time. Yes, way in the back.
Way in the back, yes.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't help but notice the dramatic change in those census numbers between just before the Civil War and just after the Civil War in the size of the black population. Do we think that that's real, or do people just fall out of being counted by the census?
No, it's also, the question is how does the sharp decline in the black population after the Civil War, how can that be explained? I showed the decline really starts in the 20th century. After the Civil War, when the black communities formed in Montgomery County, the population remained at around 30%. And then really started, it was a decline in terms of percentage in the 20th century. Because what was happening, that was the beginning really of suburbanization of Montgomery County. And so there was a large influx of white people into Montgomery County. A lot of, and especially with World War I and the Depression, the federal government growing and many of those workers moving to Montgomery County. And so it was that the white population was increasing so rapidly and dramatically. There was some black people were leaving the county because with suburbanization, there were fewer job opportunities. By and large, black men worked on farms, and the farms were beginning to disappear. So it's really, the mathematics show that when in percentage terms, it was a large decline because of the big increase in the white population, which also which was very significant after World War II and the baby boom. And that's when Montgomery County just exploded in terms of population. Yes, sir.
How did the pace of desegregation of Montgomery County's parochial schools compare with the pace of desegregation of the public schools?
Parochial schools, I do not recall, maybe someone can help me. I do not recall when parochial schools desegregated. I believe it was in the District of Columbia, I believe it was before the Brown decision. In terms of private schools, I do know that a number of very progressive private schools in Montgomery County There's one still, it's been around a long time, Green Acres School, a little south of Rockville. It was racially mixed from the very start. Yes, sir, in the back.
One of your early slides, there was a photograph of some legislative act, said that the age of education for the Negro students or colored students was, I think, age 6 to age 20. Do you recall that slide?
I don't recall that.
But it sounded like it was age 20 was the cap at the end of the period of when the county was required to provide education. That surprised me. I don't know when, what the equivalent age would be for the
Yeah,
white kids.
I'll go back and look at that afterwards. You can come up if you want. I suspect that's just mirroring the language of the law for white students from age 6 to 20, assuming that you might still be in 12th grade as of age 20, if you've repeated perhaps. I can't really explain it, sorry. Yes?
This may be outside the scope of what you did, but I'm curious, what happened in Montgomery County during the Civil War?
The question's a broad one. What happened in Montgomery County during the Civil War? Yes, I did talk about that in the keynote a week ago about that was covering Montgomery County's 250 years in about an hour. Just briefly, I guess the point what I talked about in that was that Montgomery County, the Civil War had more of figured more in Montgomery County's history than also is generally recognized today, just what I said about slavery in Montgomery County. We had no big battles like Antietam or Gettysburg, but here we are right next to the nation's capital, right beside the Potomac River. The Potomac River, rather than the Mason-Dixon line, was really the dividing line between the North and South. So the armies crisscrossed all the time through Montgomery County. There were some skirmishes, and in some spots, the western part of the county was very sympathetic to the Confederate cause. It was practically martial law in some spots in the county. So it was definitely a big part of our history. To that, I'll leave it there. Yes, sir.
What can you say more specifically about school desegregation in Chevy Chase? I know you mentioned the housing patterns. I remember that when we moved down here, our kids went to Rosemary Hills, and we were told there'd been a lot of resistance in Chevy Chase to Rosemary Hills, and I gathered that was more than just the busing issue. What can you? Yeah,
I'm sure there are people here who can speak better to it than I can. Rosemary Hills is, I believe, the school closest to the Littonsville community, and that's the historic African American community. And there was concern in Chevy Chase, and there was some concern initially. I mentioned, I put in the slide, I didn't really talk about it. There was resistance really only in Poolesville, western part of the county, perhaps hearkening back to what I just said about the western part of the county being very sympathetic to the Confederate cause going back to the Civil War. But there was some resistance also at Rollingwood at the time. It's no longer an elementary school. I think it's vacant currently. But it was largely, as I explained, mostly the children went to the schools closest to where they lived. So I think probably Rollingwood at that time, I think it was something like 30 black kids would be at Rollingwood, and then this was pointed out, 0 at Chevy Chase. And so that school was more concerned. And so Rosemary Hills, as time went on, Rosemary Hills had a higher black percentage in terms of enrollment than other schools, and I guess you could trace it to that. Yes, sir.
Part of that dispute, the problem was they were closing Rolling Wood completely. So the kids would either be in Chevy Chase or in Rosemary Hills. So a lot of the rejection in the Rolling Wood community where I lived was to the fact that that school was being completely eliminated. And it's never been, it was closed and it's never closed. It was used as a private school subsequent for that.
And as I recall also, in Chevy Chase, 2 schools were paired, I can't remember which ones, and one became K through 3, and another school became the upper grades, and that was all in an effort also to balance things out a little more. But again, that was a change, and that was only, as far as I know, that was only in Chevy Chase where that kind of grade grouping was occurring. So, you know, neighborhood schools are near and dear to everyone's heart, and so any change is not always welcomed. And I think the school committee is going to tackle redistricting again, redistricting county-wide, so batten down for that. Way in the back.
In 1980, circa 1980s, this Rosemary Hills question caused many dinner parties in the village, and there were the private school people who would never consider it, but we had a small group that said, no, we're going to do it. And it was a success and continues to be so, I think. And I remember well that there was a Martin Luther King event, and we went and the teachers had flipped all the racial roles. So my daughter was Coretta, and the bus driver was black. And as far as I can see, even with my grandchildren, things have gone well at Rosemary Hills.
And I think that's a good note to end on. that things worked out well in the end.
Thank you again for coming. I think everybody found this to be really enlightening.